Salutations, ladies and gentlemen, the Knife Raven here, back again with another video. And in today's video, I'll be having a look at a knife that has been quite requested, not just among my subscribers, but also in the overall knife community. One of the most iconic pieces ever, perhaps, in the knife world, and a knife that has stood the test of time for not quite, but it will be nearing 100 years. And it's a design that dates back quite far, made by a company that's very well known, and, of course, I'm referring to the Buck 110. Now, I would like to specify and say, this knife is not mine. This knife is my dad's. He was interested in a larger folding knife made by Buck, and what better choice than the 110, so this was bought for his birthday. And I asked if, before he uses it, I give it a quick rundown for my viewers, and he was kind enough to say yes. Now, before someone comes at me and says, "You've never used this knife, your dad's never used this knife, you've never used this knife, how can you review it?" Well, many of my reviews have been from the perspective of a collector, not just a user, because I've seen dozens of Buck 110 reviews where they've been from the perspective of the user, the abuser, the hunter, the outdoorsman, the everyday carry enthusiast, and the backpacker. However, you don't often see the perspective of a knife such as this being used by a collector and reviewed by one. Now, granted, most people who review knives are collectors, but that's aside from the point. I consider myself to be a bit of a pretentious individual in the sense that my collection items are far more unnecessarily expensive, fancy, and otherwise not necessary compared to the normal buyer. And that's not me bragging. In fact, I actually consider it a bit of illness. An addiction, if you will. But that's aside from the fact that this knife is one of the most popular in history, at least in the United States. A lot have deemed it America's knife, as it is arguably the most recognizable piece from the United States. And as a Canadian man who has never really had that same heritage of Buck knives, we've got Groman, but it doesn't have the same level of legend that Buck does, because Buck is world-renowned. Groman, perhaps not as much. But today, I'll cut the talking about nothingness and get into discussing this knife, how it's made, how it feels in the hand, and perhaps whether or not you should buy one. So to start, this is a very big knife. I will measure it for you. The handle comes in immediately at an impressive 4 3/4 inches, which is fairly large. The clip point blade, measuring the unsharpened bit, just over 3.5 inches, and the cutting edge is just barely, not quite touching 3.5. So this is a very large blade and a very large knife. Overall length, which isn't even in frame, is over 8.5 inches. So this is a substantial knife. Far too large for the conventional pocket carry. Despite this, many people do actually carry these as very large folding pocket knives. I would personally not recommend carrying this as a pocket knife, but again, it could be argued that as a suburban dwelling pretentious collector, I'd carry something more along the lines of this. And, well, again, if you choose to carry this as your pocket carry or belt carry, that's perfectly fine. We all have our preferences for what knives we like to carry, what knives we use, and what we deem to be the best use of our pocket space. The Buck 110, while quite large, is not made as a pocket knife. I want to get that out of the gate very quickly so no misconceptions are made. While it can be used as a pocket knife, that's not what it's made for. It's called the 110 Folding Hunter for a reason. You see, when it was invented, and I'm probably preaching to the choir here, everyone's heard this, it was built as a hunting knife, but with the portability and ease of carry that a pocket knife would have. So it was meant to be a folding hunter. Pretty basic. But it's got the blade and the strength of a fixed blade, but with the portability of a larger folding knife. And because of that, it was considered very popular. These were ordered in fairly large batches in the 60s, which is when I believe this was invented. And it has become Buck's most iconic knife to date. Only coming close would probably be the 119 fixed blade, the 119 Special. And it's no surprise why this has become a cult classic. You've got these wonderful polished brass bolsters. I will shine them here for you so no fingerprints are in the way. You can see beautiful reflective mirror shine here. Very, very elegant, very traditional. And unfortunately, some may consider this a bad thing, where I actually consider it an okay thing. It makes for a fairly heavy frame, as brass is no light material. The blade, which is a gorgeous clip point, has a twin swedge and a hollow grind, and it is made of 420HC steel. 420HC is a stainless steel, and many consider it to be a budget or mid-range steel. However, it is featuring the Paul Boss heat treatment. Paul Boss is a very well-known heat treater. He is a legend in the blade community, famous for a wonderful heat treatment method. And Buck has used it as a wonderful mean of gaining fame, as they can take a steel as basic as 420HC and make it into a very formidable blade using this heat treatment. Now, I know some people say it's no S1, it's no S110V, it's no S30V. Yes, well, you have to keep in mind, those steels can cost you $300 or more. This didn't even cost 100 Canadian, and that was a fairly expensive price too. You can get these for as low as, I believe, $30 in the USA. Anyone? No. Okay, well, aside from brass and the very, very pointy clip point, which is needle sharp at the very tip, the grind is simple enough. It's hollow grind. I have seen some people turn this into a flat grind before. Can't really say I'd do that. The hollow grind does offer good slicing performance while also keeping the edge fairly strong. And the blade thickness is a little on the middle of the road side. Certainly not thick, but it's not an open L either. Here's some knives to compare it to. You've got kind of a yin and yang here. You have a very thick, for its size, Hele Cletton, which is still thicker than the Buck, despite being a very small little lockback. This is far more within the pocket knife realm, although it still is well built enough that it could easily be a folding hunter of its own accord. And I have arguably the thinnest knife I ever have had, which is the Kiridashi knife, which is, as you can see, thinner than some straight razors, and featuring a chisel grind. Now, aside from blade thickness and steel, got a very simple one marking. It just says Buck 110. You have the symbol for the year it was made. Buck has these little symbols that they change every year, and that way you can tell what year your Buck was made. And then right under it, although hidden by the bolster, it will say USA. This is proudly made in Post-Falls, Idaho, and most buck knives are made there. There are some that are made overseas, but the most well-known, such as the 119, 110, and such, are made in the USA. The handles are made of a beautiful, close-grained ebony wood. I heard that Buck used to use diamond wood, which is sort of like a resin-modified plywood. However, recently they partnered with Taylor Guitars and are sourcing genuine ebony. I believe it's from the Crelicam region. And it's a very, very nice grain pattern. Very smooth. Takes a great polish. Even just a bit of mineral oil, excuse me, goes a long way. You have the traditional Buck raised pins, or rivets, I should say. You've got some brass, and then you have the nickel silver. Not sure why Buck does this, but it's an interesting little touch that only they do. And of course, you have your lockback, which is the most famous part about this knife. Many say that they pioneered the backlock mechanism, and while history will probably see it that way, we know that's not necessarily true, as there are knives such as the Mercator K55K from Germany, which is a decent example of a mid-1800s lockback. So, while Buck may have pioneered this style of lockback, it's not the first of a locking folding knife. The comfort in the hand is fairly good. Again, this is probably made for those with larger hands. My hands are of a smaller to medium size, so you can see this fits perfectly well. I've got a good four-finger grip here, and then some. However, and this was my main reason for not buying this almost a year ago when I had the opportunity to get it, instead I purchased the 112 Ranger, the smaller version of the 110 that was released to deal with short blade laws. And this knife, for me, is absolutely perfect in the hand. You have the copperhead bolster at the front, which makes for a beautiful grip. This is still one of the most, if not the most comfortable handle I have on a knife. And while the 110 is certainly comfortable enough that I don't think it would slip out of my hand if I was ever using it, I still have to favor the 112. But again, I'm not saying you should buy the 112 over the 110, but I am saying that, to me at least, I find this to be a much more comfortable choice for using overall. I haven't really used this knife much, but simply holding it, I can already tell that the 112, to me, is still the more comfortable of the two. And while the 110 has been around for longer and is more popular, I still think that I would recommend the 112 just as much. However, that's not the complete extent of my comparisons. You see, I brought forth a third knife, my favorite of the three, ironically enough, and that would be the Buck 55. This is the last of this series of Buck classic lock blades, and I know there's the 501, 505, 500, and such, but I'm talking about the ebony-handled clip-point blade with brass bolsters models that are part of the 110 family. The 55 is definitely out of the league that the other two are in, which would be folding hunting knife. However, the 055 still has its fair share of usability. It's much more slender, much more scaled down, but the 55 is called the 55 because it is exactly half the size of the 110. And you can see that's not quite correct. It's not half the size of the 110, but it is absolutely dwarfed in size compared to its older brother here. Now, the 110, which again lives up to its name, is most well known as a folding hunting knife. It's a knife made for hunters, by hunters, and whether you intend to take this out on the trail as a backup knife for the campsite, or you wish to go on a hunting trip and bring this along instead of a fixed blade, as it's more user-friendly and carry-friendly because of the leather pouch, which comes with the knife. Again, simple design, clasp sheath. Would make for a very nice carry on the belt. And again, as comparison, the 112 and its sheath, you can see there is a noticeable difference in size here. But this video has gone on for long enough. You've heard me babble on about the steel, about the handle, and the fit and finish, which I should quickly touch on. Gapping is non-existent. The blade is solid as a tank. Transitions are wonderful. The raised pins are meant to be raised, so that's not a flaw. Lock bar, maybe it's a little bit off here, but aside from that, not a problem. Blade is absolutely straight. No problem there. And the only real flaw I can find is that it's a bit off-center. But that's it. So, quality-wise, this is a very great knife. It's certainly not, you know, a premium $400 custom knife that took a week to make. But it's certainly, it's worth its cost. Now, my final conclusion on the Buck 110. And this isn't final, I would like to say. What I'm going to do is, of course, give it back to my dad. And he's more of a user than I am. And he's going to use this, and eventually, after it's been used, sharpened, it's been used to open boxes, been used in the yard, the workshop, and such, I'm going to see how well does it hold up. Is it a good choice for around the house tasks and chores? Or is it really just a hunting knife? Now, I already know the answer to this. Of course it's not. This knife is a hunting knife at its core, but not necessarily just a hunting knife. While it does have excellent performance in what it is made for, again, it would be a very good to carry, unintentional rhyme, knife for hunting in place of a fixed blade and just general outdoor use. I still think that if you are in need of a hard use knife and you prefer a larger carry, a more traditional one at that, then this could be used around the house, or depending on where you work and what your knife laws are, maybe even at your job. But I do think that the 110 is for everybody. Whether you're a hunter, whether you're an EDC enthusiast, whether you're a collector like myself, whether you want a knife to give to someone who may or may not check any of those boxes, I still think that this is a great knife. And with Buck's forever warranty, if anything ever happens to this knife, even if you abuse it, they can still fix it for you. I've seen many cases of repaired Bucks that look like they're brand new. And Buck really does have a great warranty service. It's one of the best, I'd say, compared to, say, Case or, well, that's the first brand that can come to mind. Now, the 112. Have my opinions changed on the 112? Not at all. Is it still a hunting knife? Yes. Is it still an outdoors knife for someone who wants something a bit smaller than the 110? Yes. Is it still an EDC for someone who wants a heavier, hard use, everyday carry? Yes. Is it for the collector? Absolutely. My opinions have not changed on the 112 either. And because I brought it out, have my opinions on the 55 changed? No. Still a great gentleman's pocket knife, won't scare anyone, and as long as you can have a lockback knife, the blade is so small, most laws will have absolutely no problem with it. Great for around-the-house chores, great as a pocket knife, great as a little conversation piece and such, and absolutely wonderful for the collector. So all in all, I have nothing bad to say about these knives. While yes, the 55 may not be good for hard use, while yes, the 110 may not be good for a gentleman's carry, and while yes, the 112 may do both things, but not quite as good as its competitors being the 110 and the 55. Yes, these are all true. But that's like saying a frying pan isn't as good at making toast as a toaster. Well, of course it's not. It's a frying pan. Go to culinary school. But in the meantime, I think that this is a great knife, and you can make fun of me all you want and say, well, I've never used it. Well, I'm not a hunter. Yeah, I'm not. I'm a collector. I appreciate knives of good quality with lots of history that have traditional aesthetics and are made using nice materials. This knife, like the 112 and the 55 and many of Buck's other knives, all fit into that category, and for that reason, I'm happy to have one in my household. And I really hope my dad enjoys it, just as much as I enjoy the 112 and the 55. So, again, this is not the last time you'll see any of these three knives. I'll probably do re-reviews on the 112 and 55 soon enough. And when it's been enough time, I'll do a re-review on this, see how it held up. But, again, if you've made it this far with me, thank you very much for listening to my ramblings and ravings. I appreciate it. And, again, if you don't have one of these already, I highly recommend you grab one. They're historical, they're traditional, they're just beautifully classic, they're simple in their construction, they've got a great warranty, nice steel, prices aren't terrible, and whether you're a hunter, outdoorsman, or just a general user, you can find a place in your carry for a Buck 110. So, thank you very much for watching. This has been the Buck 110 Folding Hunter, and this is the Knife Raven, as always, signing off. Goodbye.